All right, guys, check-in time now for the Indiana Pacers doing trade deadline preview stuff. But of course, just quickly touching on the news with Victor Oladipo confirmed that he has a ruptured quad tendon, so he will miss the rest of the regular season. So I think that changes a lot of the calculations here for the Pacers. They've got a bunch of guys who are unrestricted free agents. Now, just quickly touching on it, I think that if a guy like Bojan Bogdanovic or Darren Collison is on your waiver wire, you grab him. Tyreek Evans, you grab him as well. Corey Joseph gets a little bit more appeal, but he's still more of a fringe 14 team. So he's more of a 14 team fringe 12-team league, and deeper leagues 16-teamers. Aaron Holiday is the guy you want to take a look at there. But on this team, a bunch of unrestricted free agents. Darren Collison, Bojan Bogdanovic, Thad Young, Tyreek, Corey Joseph. All these guys are unrestricted free agents. And there was thought that maybe they could look to package some of these guys, move some of them, have an upgrade at that point guard position, maybe get in on the Mike Conley sweepstakes in Memphis. But with this injury to Oladipo, it changes a couple of things. A, they need these guys now to help them get through this. But B, are they going to slip down the seedings in the Eastern Conference? They didn't at the start of the season when Oladipo was out, so that's bearing in mind. But then they might be like, maybe they are looking to sell these guys more because they're like, oh, well, shit, we're not going to compete this season. These guys are unrestricted. Do we just try and get something back in return and rebuild this thing for next season when Oladipo hopefully is able to return and return to his best of last season? So there's a couple of interesting things here. With this team, I would have thought the most likely guy to get moved on this team was Collison. With Oladipo out now, I'd say that's probably unlikely. Corey Joseph, Nate McMillan obviously loves what he does in a bench role. I'm not really sure what team would be looking to take Corey Joseph on in a deal. If I had to pick between those two guys as the most likely to get moved, I would still think it is Collison as they look to have an upgrade in that backcourt. And that probably hurts his value. Now, I think Collison can be close to a top 50, top 60 guy for the rest of the season with Oladipo missing in Indiana, and almost definitely a team that he goes to, unless it is in Memphis, he might struggle to get to that same level. And that could have an impact there. But this isn't a team that's just going to be trading guys away to open up minutes necessarily for young players. So I wouldn't be looking at huge beneficiaries on this team. But I think they are still in the mix to shake some things up. That Oladipo injury, I think, and this sounds like a cop-out, but it could really impact things wildly in either direction. And they're not in that same position they were. They could be in a, shit, we need help. Let's go make a move and get someone else in here. Or, oh, we're not going anywhere. Let's try and get younger assets. So it really does change it from a more of a, maybe a stand pat type of let's consolidate to a, we need to go hard in either direction here. And I think that's a real risk with these guys. But if I had to put on it for one guy to get moved, it probably would be Collison. It won't be Sabonis. It won't be Turner. I don't think it'll be Thad Young. I don't think it'll be Corey Joseph. You're not going to get much back in a trade for Doug McDermott. And Bojan Bogdanovic perhaps, but I highly doubt that he is the guy that would be on the move. They still do have the three guards, Collison, Joseph, and Evans, along with Aaron Holiday. And if Holiday shows a bit in these next couple of games, one of those guys could be considered expendable. So that's how I would look at it for the Indiana Pacers at this point. But of course, that Oladipo injury, as terrible as it was, does change a lot of the calculations, and we'll see how that plays out over the next couple of weeks for this team. All right, let's do a check-in now on the LA Clippers, a team who, again, like the Pacers, do have a number of players who are unrestricted free agents heading into this next summer. Tobias Harris, Patrick Beverley, Luke Marmute, Boban Marjanovic, Marcin Gortat, Prison Mike, and then you've got Milos Teodosic as a restricted free agent there as well. A lot of the concerns with the Clippers are the Avery Bradley lineups and starting him over players who perhaps are more valuable, or not even starting but playing him more minutes. In terms of guys who potentially could get traded, I'd say Milos Teodosic is probably the most likely guy to get moved. Coming back would be a pretty marginal asset and not one that would necessarily have any sort of impact in fantasy situations. The other guy who I think has an opportunity perhaps to get moved is Marcin Gortat on this team. His value in his role wildly fluctuates from game to game depending on Doc Rivers' whims. There are times when he doesn't play, there are times when he starts and plays 20 minutes, there are times when he plays 10 minutes. And you've got the play of Montrezl Harrell, you've got Boban there in emergencies, you've got the emerging play of Jonathan Motley as well, who can handle some center minutes at times. So there could be something interesting happening there for the Clippers. The other guy I think we'd have to pay attention to, and while Doc doesn't have front office decision-making power anymore, the Avery Bradley thing, I think he'd be the ideal guy to try and move. I don't think they'll be doing that, but he would be that ideal option. I think Patrick Beverley is at risk of being moved on this team, and what that could do in that scenario is open up a little bit more for Gilgeous-Alexander. Now, Shea was playing 30 plus a night consistently, and then Doc decided to reduce him down to 20 and call him out publicly, which I thought was a real dick move. If Beverley goes and they're not getting another like player back, then you could see Shea's minutes push back up to 30. Some of this is going to be dependent on the Clippers' playoff seeding and positioning, and if they're still in the mix for the playoffs. But that could boost some value for Shea as the season goes on, as well as a guy in deep leagues with John Motley. If they do happen to move on from Marcin Gortat or even Mike Scott, that could open up something for Motley, who is on a two-way. But I think they'd like to get him converted, although they had some issues converting someone like Ty Wallace last season. So some opportunities there with the Clippers, some interesting lineup decisions they have to make. Most likely to move would be Milosh, in my opinion, and then you got Beverley and Gortat as other potential guys who could potentially be on the move. All right, let's do a check-in now on the Los Angeles Lakers trade deadline stuff. We hear so much talk about this Lakers team being involved in trades. I do not think there is any chance of Anthony Davis coming there this season. We hear about the young guys all the time: Kyle Kuzma, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, Lonzo Ball. Are they going to be packaged off for other players? I really highly doubt that's going to be the case. If any of those four young guys move, I believe it would be Ingram, because I think that they could probably get the most return for him. People still believe there is untapped potential in Ingram. I'm not quite as high on that scenario, but if he did move on, it would be to get a better player back, and that would mean that the players on this roster wouldn't necessarily get a larger opportunity. The guy who I do think is probably the most likely to get dealt, outside of Lance Stevenson, I think he's a pretty massive chance to go, is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. He could be looking for a larger sort of role. Now, his role has been increased of late, but when Rondo and LeBron are back in action, some of his minutes and his playing time is going to go away. So I could see KCP moving on. And then in that case, that would make Josh Hart really a borderline 12-team league guy. Again, so much of this conjecture and speculation depends on which player would be coming back in that deal. And that's why a lot of the time trying to stash guys based on potential hypothetical trade scenarios that you think are absolutely obvious isn't always going to, in fact, majority of the time isn't going to work out, because players coming back is a complicating factor. Unless it's a player getting moved for a draft pick only, and then things can get a little bit complicated. But I think that KCP is a significant chance to be moved here on this team, along with Lance Stevenson. And if any of the major rotation players do go, I think Ingram is that guy. And I think if Brandon Ingram went to another team, his value would increase almost definitely, because he wouldn't be sharing the ball with Lonzo, with Rondo, and with LeBron. And that's something where his value comes in. Think of him as I was going to say better, but I'm not sure if that's the right word. I think of him as Justice Winslow, a player who struggles with shooting, but can be a little bit more successful when the ball is in his hands. And that's the sort of level of player that maybe he can get to. Maybe he can be a top 60 guy in an environment where he's not sharing the ball and he is being used more as a primary creator type player. So he'd be a name to watch along with KCP. They are probably the two highest chances guys on the Lakers of getting moved. All right, last team we're going to take a look at here, trade deadline fantasy check, and we're looking at the Memphis Grizzlies, and of course all the news with them is about Mike Conley and Marc Gasol. Wherever these two guys end up going, I think that there is probably a better than 50% chance that they find themselves in better situations, because they'll be playing for a better coach. Almost definitely there's only like one other team that they could really go to where the coach would be worse, hashtag Chicago Bulls. But mostly they'd be going to a team with a higher pace. Higher pace, more possessions, more statistical production for these guys. And they're putting up strong numbers. They're probably locks to be top 45 guys for the rest of the season. And wherever they go, it's not like you're trading for Marc Gasol and putting him into a 20-minute role. You're not trading for Conley to come in and be your backup point guard. They're going to have similar value. But what it could do is open up things in Memphis. Again, we don't know what's going to happen to players coming back in those deals, and they'd almost assuredly be getting some sort of guys back. But the opportunity there would open up for Jaren Jackson Jr. to play his preferred position, which is center. That's his best position. That should help his field goal percentage. It should help his blocks as well. And hopefully he can play more minutes now, if that is the case. So he is a must-roster player anyway, but I think he's got a real chance of a value spike. JaMychal Green. We've seen JaMychal Green for many seasons being the starter in Memphis. He took over from Zach Randolph a couple of seasons ago. He's played decent minutes. he just isn't a great fantasy guy. We've seen that from him. So while we can look at him as this stash type of guy, last season he played 28 minutes a night and was 161st. The year before he played 27 minutes a night and was 130th. Now, to be fair to Jermichael, he has improved. He's been a much higher usage player this season, 22% usage. The defensive numbers have improved from him significantly this year, almost double the block rate. And the steal rate's almost double as well this season, so that does help him. And he'd be interesting as a 12-team stash at this point, with the hope that a move happens there. For the point guard spot, maybe a youngish point guard comes back. Think maybe it's someone, maybe it's Dennis Smith, someone like that. Then they take all that value. But Shelvin Mack and Javon Carter. Bickerstaff has had a massive love affair with Mack pretty much all of this season, so he would come in. And we saw last season in Orlando, he had stretches of being a viable player, while Javon Carter would be the guy that they absolutely should be going to. And if they're trading away Conley and Gasol because they want to facilitate a rebuild, well, Shelvin Mack is no part of your rebuild in any situation or any definition of that word. So Javon Carter would be the guy. If I'm going to stash someone as a point guard here, it is going to be him, a guy that is a high steals generator. He averaged, I think, over 3 steals per game last season for West Virginia. An assist, a steals, maybe hit some threes, although he has struggled with that this season, not been a great shooter at all. But getting steals and getting assists can be a viable thing. So he could be someone at least to keep an eye on, or if you're in a real solid position with an ability to stash on a bench, he could be an interesting upside type of guy in that sort of situation.